It's coming towards the end of the year, and I thought, for a change, I would do my yearly book recommendation. Some books that I've read this year that I thought might be interesting to my fellow audience. It's an eclectic selection, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, and these are my books. So to start with, very unusual one. This one, quite an old one. Some people may recognize this from the past. Pure White and Deadly. It talks about sugar, the sugar industry, what sugar is, the refined sugar that we have in all sorts of our products these days, and the dangers that it causes for our health. It's a bit of an eye-opener, really, and as a result of reading this, I bought this some years ago actually, and it's typical with me. It sits on my shelf, and then suddenly, I don't know why, a book will just look at me as if to say it's time to be read. And this was one such one, Pure White and Deadly, about the sugars that we have, that we choose to put in our teas and coffees, the bars, the biscuits, the pies, the pastries, but also a number of other things that you didn't expect sugar to be in, and it's pretty much in so much. And as a result of reading this, I am trying as best I can to have a sugar-free diet. I think it works, I think it's good for you, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. It came out, I think, in 1972, and this is a reprint. So it's well worth having a look at that. I'll make a list of all the recommendations and put them on the description below, so that if you fancy it, have a look. The second one is, again, it's an old book but republished, I think. This Land is Our Land by Marion Sherwood. And this is a book, I have to say, I really only got about halfway through it. It's quite a large tome, but it is absolutely fascinating. I believe that the central message is pretty much in the first half of the book, although that said, there is plenty more to read, but I think it was just a bit too heavy going for me in places. However, the central message, I think, is absolutely fascinating, and it tells the story of really who owns the land and by how much and what they do with it. And it's a fascinating story. So if you're interested in England and property rights, who owns that sort of thing, this is quite great. As I say, it's quite involved, it's quite heavy, it's great research, and I need to finish it. It talks about the rights of way and common land, the wealth of the people who own it, what they get from it, how it was obtained in the first place, what they mean by owning the land, all that sort of stuff. Fascinating read. I do recommend it, but you have to be in the right mood for that book, I guess. We have on a different channel now, started out on the Bald Explorer channel, a live reading. I was going to say a group, but it is a group. It's a collection of people who get together and I read. It started during the COVID business, during the first lockdown, and I was thinking, how can I entertain people, keep them amused? And I love reading, and I thought, well, we'll start this book reading club and see if people come along, and I'll read. We'll stop in the middle of the reading, we'll look at the places that the authors are talking about, and because it started on the Bald Explorer channel, it was all about travel around England. So that's what we've managed to carry on doing, looking at those people who travel around England and different places, because that's pretty much the ethos of the Bald Explorer, exploring heritage, landscape and nature. One of the first books that we read, and it is a classic and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I had read it, at least I thought I'd read it before, but as I was reading it aloud, I realised that I hadn't read it totally. Narrowboat by L.T.C. Rolt, an absolutely beautiful piece of writing, and it is the book that kick-started all the canal resurgence in this country from the 1940s, 50s and 60s onwards, and of course the preservation of the canal systems that back in the 1920s and 30s were dying. Rolt is an amazing and poetic author, And this, I think, a classic, of course, is one of his best works. His other works are a bit more technical, a bit more involved in more documentary, whereas this is a personal story of his journey on a narrowboat up and down the country, and absolutely fantastic. Now, a lot of these books are in no particular order. I've just picked them off my shelf thinking I must share them with you. This is another one I found absolutely fascinating to read, by Colin Tudge, and So Shall We Reap. Now, you may remember I've been earlier in the year very much talking about farming practices. I was struck when I was walking through the monoculture in the springtime on the South Downs, these big swathes of land with really only one crop, field after field after field, and barely any wildlife. And the next few series of books that I'm going to show you also replicate that story, which is something that's ever present at the moment. So this is one that I would most definitely recommend. So Shall We Reap by Colin Tudge, and absolutely brilliant. What's gone wrong with the world's food and how to fix it. I found that very enlightening, and Colin is an absolutely terrific author, brings you right in. Graham Harvey is another one who writes on the same sort of subject, and this is The Killing of the Countryside. This again is quite old. I forget when it was published, about in the 70s or 80s, I think. Oh, this first published 1997. There you go. So not too old. And it talks about the countryside, the old practices of farming, mixed farming, that have been done for generations. And then after the war, the new type of farming that came in with pesticides and those ways to increase the crop but actually decrease the fertilization of the soil. And at the same time, there was this movement to increase the size of the fields, to plough up hedgerows, and again this was affecting the countryside. And he very much blames the government, the subsidies, not so much the farmers. They were sort of pushed into this, apart from the very large farmers who were getting the subsidies, and they're supposed to be the guardians of the countryside, but it seems that they are pretty much the ones that have been destroying it. A great argument. So Graham Harvey is again another great reader to follow that. We looked at an earlier book, I forget what it's called now, This Land Is Our Land by Marion Shoard. This is another one, The Theft of the Countryside, similar vein to Graham Harvey, and again with lots of detail, lots of reports, lots of facts that come in that show so much of our countryside has been stolen in the name of big farming. And between the two of them, they're arguing that we don't actually need all this land producing so much food and the monoculture that we have. But the argument is, of course, that we do from the other side. Again, that's a fascinating book and well worth a read if you're into those sort of things. This is a book by Robin Page, and I spoke about this, I think, at the very early months of this year. It may even been towards the end of this last year. An absolute beauty of a book, so beautifully written, like so many of the books. This one really got to my heart, very recently published, 2019, and Robin Page talks of the decline of the English village. And as I've been going around the countryside doing my walks, I've very much noticed how sterile and empty the villages of this nation are. The old busy pubs, the busy towns, the shops, the individual shops, the butchers, the bakers and so forth, all gone, stripped away, schools closed, post offices closed, and that villages, instead of having a mixed collection of people that work in the rural society around that village, is now in the belt, really, of those with the big cars, either retired or who commute or work in completely different industries, and that whole hierarchy of the village and the way of life that was so traditional for thousands of years, gone. And this is such an interesting thing, because he doesn't just talk about the people, but he also talks about the wildlife, and how in each various steps at about 15-year blocks, the change of the English village, the village that he grew up in. And it's an amazing and heart-rendering story, really, but so beautifully written. I thoroughly recommend that. And I would just like to mention this book, which Linda Kane gave me for Christmas. I only opened it a few days ago. Now, she said that she read this in one sitting. She couldn't put it down. It's James Rebank's English Pastoral, An Inheritance. And I've only read, I suppose, a fifth at the moment. It's beautiful, and I thoroughly recommend this. It's only just come out, I think. And it's an absolutely lovely book. Just looking here to see when it was published, 2020. And already I know that this is a cracker. This is the story of a man who has inherited a farm. He's worked on the farm. His father worked on the farm. His grandfather worked on the farm. And I've only got a fifth of the way through. And at the moment, the grandfather is taking the young James Rebanks and teaching him the old ways. And it seems that the other farmers are laughing at this old man and how he looks after the farm in the traditional ways. Now, I get a sense from the stuff that I've been reading on the other books that the author is going to talk about similar things of this globalization of farming, this one product of farming that many farmers are doing, and how that is destroying the country and the landscape and our traditions. And I'm absolutely finding this really an amazing book. I have had to put it down because I've had things to do, but over the last couple of days I've just been avidly reading in between bits and bobs. So there we go. That's my suggested or highlights of my year. Hopefully next year I'll do another one, but you know, when I find a good book, no doubt I'll present it on a video. I hope you found that interesting, if nothing else, and maybe check out the links and see if any of those books are of interest. I guess the highlight for me this year was this book, and I'm suspecting that this one is also. For me, there's something about the old traditional ways of living that we are very rapidly steamrolling over and getting rid of in terms of this, in exchange for this new progressive world. It frightens me and appalls me. And at the moment, with the COVID situation and the locking up of people and all of that, more than ever, I think we need to hold on to our traditions and the ways that we used to live and the freedoms that we used to have. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe. If you've enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up. And if you feel like becoming a patron and supporting what I do, that would be fantastic. Go to baldexplorer.com to see how to do that. Otherwise, have a great time. Bye for now. Bye-bye.